Welcome everyone to the second panel of this workshop, Rethinking Female Founding Figures in the Archaic and Classical Periods. And our first speaker is Dr. Marta Oller Guzman, and she is joining us remotely from Barcelona, where she is professor of Greek philology at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. She gained her PhD on the cult of Achilles. And those who are not involved with Achilles may be surprised to hear into how many different fields of research that was an entrance ticket for Marta. And surprisingly, actually, many pathways that resulted of her work on Achilles then also started to overlap with my works, such as the study of the ancient Black Sea, where Achilles was a very popular god, but also the study of powerful women in ancient legendary traditions and also in ancient historical accounts, for which the Black Sea region is a very fertile area. So Marta has published various articles and also a book translation of Euripides' Iphigenia in Aulis into a translation into her mother tongue, Catalan. She has currently an edited volume on leadership of powerful women forthcoming. And she is now or what has brought her here in particular was that I wanted to be her part of the research team that explores colonial encounters in the archaic world, because her articles have given me many new insights and have really changed the direction of how I want to reconstruct early colonial encounters, understanding that our sources report so much more of collaboration rather than conquest and oppression. That is often something that comes at a much later stage. So Marta has put forward very convincing case studies on that. And another focus of Marta's research is emotions in the context of foundation legends, especially the topic of fear. But today she will highlight a couple of powerful women in foundation roles. So the title of her presentation is Women's Roles in Ancient Greek Stories of Colonization, New Perspectives on an Ancient Topic. Marta, the floor is yours.
So good morning, everybody. And first of all, I would like to thanking Altai for his words and for inviting me to participate in this session. I am delighted to be here and to have the chance to discuss with you my ideas about the roles that women played in some stories of colonization. In ancient sources, it is quite uncommon to find references to Greek or indigenous women in colonial processes. Regarding Greek women, their presence in colonial expeditions is not usually mentioned, which has fostered the idea that Greek colonization was essentially a male undertaking. However, it is generally acknowledged by scholars that Greek women play an important role in religious aspects of colonization. As for the indigenous women, conversely, some stories of colonization highlight not only their agency, but also their essential contribution in establishing a Greek colony by helping the colonists to overcome local resistance. However, still little emphasis has been placed on their role in colonial dynamics. In the following minutes, I will try to shed light on several often overlooked contributions of both Greek and especially indigenous women in some stories of colonization. By examining a wide range of texts, my presentation seeks to provide a more nuanced understanding of female roles and experiences in the framework of Greek colonization. Furthermore, analyzing how the ancient Greeks conceptualized women's roles in colonial narratives allows us to reflect on how cultural constructs have evolved and impacted contemporary views of the past. I will start this presentation by surveying the text about Greek women in colonial enterprises. Following the previous scholar works, three main Greek female roles have been distinguished: wandering wives, wandering priestesses, and anonymous women within a mass migration. Next slide, please. As for wandering wives, the only example I am aware of is that of Aethra, the wife of the Spartan Phalanthus, the founding hero of Tarentum. We owe to Pausanias one version of the foundation story of this Spartan colony in which the character of Aethra is introduced and plays a significant role. According to Pausanias, Phalanthus was preparing a colonial expedition to Italy when received an oracle according to which he was to establish a city when he found rain under a clear sky. Disregarding the oracle, Phalanthus arrived in Italy and confronted the local peoples, but he failed to take any city or control any territory. Then he remembered the oracle, but he was unable to understand its meaning. When Phalanthus, distressed by this situation, lay on his wife's lap, she began to cry. Then Phalanthus felt his head wet with his wife's tears and understood that this was the meaning of Apollo's oracle, since Aethra in Greek means clear sky. Encouraged by this revelation, he conquered Tarentum, the biggest and richest barbarian city. His wife's tears, therefore, served as the key to deciphering the oracle's riddle and in some way provided him with the mental clarity and strength to achieve victory over the locals. Thus, Aethra's character exemplifies a narrative pattern that is prevalent in female roles. Women do not directly act, but they intentionally or unintentionally motivate others to do so. Next slide, please. If we now go to wandering priestesses, we have two examples, Aristarcha of Ephesus and Kleoboia of Paros. The name of Aristarcha appears in the framework of the Phocaean colonization. According to Strabo, when the Phocaeans were preparing to leave their city, an oracle ordered them to take a guide, hegemon, from Artemis of Ephesus for the journey. When they arrived at Ephesus, Aristarcha volunteered, for the goddess had appeared to her in a dream and ordered her to go with the Phocaeans in their expedition, taking with her an ephedrima from the sacred objects of the temple. This ephedrima was added to the statues and offerings that the Phocaeans took from their city, forming a set of sacred objects which were transported to the new settlement. Another wandering priestess is mentioned in Pausanias' description of the paintings in the Cnidian Lesche at Delphi. According to him, the priestess Kleoboia was depicted inside Charon's boat, carrying a box, kiboton, related to the cult of Demeter. Pausanias claims that Kleoboia imported the mystery rituals of Demeter from Paros to Thasos. Thus texts confirm the important female role in religious matters. As other scholars have already pointed out, priestesses may have been required on colonial expeditions due to their specialized knowledge of rituals and worship. Furthermore, we can see that female priesthood provided women with greater mobility, not just inside the city and in the nearby sanctuaries, but also in the context of long and risky journeys to unknown territories far from their hometowns. Next slide, please. In reference to Greek migrant women, we are aware of two cases in which groups of anonymous migrant women leave their city and migrate with the rest of their communities. According to Herodotus, this is what happened in the Ionian cities of Phocaia and Teos, both of which decided to flee before being captured by the Persian army. I will not go into a great detail about these episodes, but I would like to underline as other scholars have already done, that both cases describe extreme situations where the entire community is in grave danger and flight is the only way to find salvation and preserve individual freedom. As we can see from the analysis of this text, Greek women play a very minor role in the stories of foundation. With exception of the religious sphere, they are followers rather than leaders. Even Ithra's unique story supports the idea that Greek women influence men to take action rather than taking action themselves. If we now examine the role of indigenous women in stories of colonization, we can enlarge the corpus of text and find more characters and narrative trends. This suggests that from the Greek perspective, indigenous women played more complex and varied roles in colonial contexts. At the risk of oversimplifying the matter, I suggest that indigenous women have greater agency than Greek women in colonial narratives. In fact, in many cases, they willingly contribute to the success of the colonial expedition. In many of these stories, love is a central theme that emphasizes the emotional side of these indigenous women and establish a narrative pattern that tends to highlight the vulnerability of the local female characters when they are experiencing intense love. As we will see, this vulnerability can be interpreted in two ways, either as a threat to the indigenous community or as a providential help for the Greeks to achieve their settling objectives. Additionally, I suggest that the more active roles of indigenous women in Greek colonization stories are largely depending on the rather widespread image of barbarian women as being more engaged and prominent in public life. Therefore, the agency of indigenous women in Greek stories of colonization should be understood within a larger conceptual framework where gender expectations dictated what Greeks were supposed to experience after arriving in a foreign land with barbarian population. I will try to support this idea, and I will begin with two examples that are pertinent to my arguments, even though they are not specifically related to Greek colonization. Next slide, please. Let's consider, for example, the Trojan women as portrayed by Plutarch in the first chapter of The Bravery of Women. In this case, a group of migrants that escaped from Troy after the city's capture was forced to search shelter in the shores of Italy. Once there, while the Trojan men were exploring the country, their women collectively decided to stop wandering by establishing a new home in that place. In order to prevent their men to act against this decision, they burned the ships. Rome, was the name of the woman who led this action. When the Trojan men realized what was happening, they tried to extinguish the flames, but the women suited them down with caresses and kisses, thus giving rise to the Roman custom for women to welcome their relatives with a kiss. Putting aside the etiological myth, Plutarch is describing the first, so to say, first women as being quite unconventional, since they take the initiative in choosing a specific site to settle without their husband's advice. Certainly, the foundation of a city was typically regarded as an exceptional moment that required a dispensation from the regular nomoi. However, the leading role of the Trojan women in deciding where to settle is quite unique and, as far as I know, had never been directly attributed to Greek women, apart from the Pythia. Next slide, please. Indeed, it appears that a non-Greek woman was more likely to be a leader in colonial enterprises. For example, Dido, formerly known as Teos or Elisa, was regarded as a founding heroine, since she carried out the main task assigned to the oikistés, which was to establish the boundaries of a new city. In an excerpt from Dido's life by Timaeus of Tauromenion, we learn about her origins in the royal dynasty of Tyre and how she was compelled to leave her homeland after her husband was killed by her brother. Dido fled by sea with some of her fellow people and after many adventures made her way to Libya, where she founded Carthage. Once there, the king of the Libyans wanted to marry her. She refused, but she was forced to agree to the proposition. Finally, she decided to commit suicide before taking a new husband. Timaeus' Dido is a totally different character from Virgil's lovelorn heroine. She's a brave woman who founds a city and dies a faithful wife to her first husband. It is perhaps not a coincidence that love plays such an important role in Virgil's depiction of Dido, since Macrobius states that Virgil learned Greek with Parthenius of Nicaea. Parthenius wrote the book of the Sorrows of Love, a collection of 36 stories of love with tragic endings. I would like to draw your attention to one of those stories that describes a foundation story, although this one is set in the mythical past. Indeed, the ancients made no difference between the so-called prehistorical colonization, which was connected with semi-divine heroes, and the historical colonization, which was associated with human ancestors. Therefore, it is not surprising that foundation stories from both periods share motives and narrative patterns. One of the most prevalent narrative patterns concerning indigenous women is that of an indigenous woman who falls deeply in love with a Greek man and betrays her community in the hopes of becoming his wife. In this narrative pattern, I am truly convinced that there is a clear influence of the epics and specifically of the Odyssey, where Odysseus is also presented as a sexually irresistible hero. Due to the lack of time, I will only discuss 6 examples on this narrative topic, indigenous women in love. 3 of them are set in a mythical and remote past, while the other 3 take place during historical context of Greek colonization. Next slide, please. Let's begin with the story of Pisidice and the sack of Methymna, as explained by Parthenius. The story goes like this. Achilles was riding along the coast of Lesbos with his army. They encountered fierce opposition from the inhabitants of Methymna, who sought refuge behind the city's walls. Pisidice, the daughter of the local king, saw Achilles from the walls and fell in love with him at first sight. She was not able to endure this feeling and sent her nurse to Achilles in order to promise him the town if he would take her as his wife. The deal was made and Pisidice betrayed her people to win Achilles' love. But when the Greeks took and sacked the city, Achilles did not hold his given word and punished her heavily. She got stoned by the Greek army. Next slide, please. According to Parthenius, this story was part of a book entitled The Founding of Lesbos, whose author most likely was Apollonius Rhodius. Parthenius even reproduces 2 allegedly original fragments of the book that provide us with some additional information. I will comment only the first one, where it is said that Aphrodite was responsible of Pisidice's betrayal by instilling love in her heart. Indeed, in ancient Greece, love is a very strong emotion or feeling that has the power to completely take over a person's body and mind. No one can escape from the power of love, not even the gods. Therefore, Pisidice's act of treason out of love was likewise reasonable and expected by the ancients. Next slide, please. A very similar story can be found in the sack of Pedasos, as explained in Eustathius' commentary on the Iliad. According to him, Achilles managed to capture the city of Pedasus thanks to the betrayal of a young anonymous woman who also fell in love with the hero by seeing him from the top of the walls. She then threw him an apple, Aphrodite's fruit, with a written message. The message revealed him that the besieged inhabitants of the city had no water, and consequently they would soon have to surrender. Then Achilles waited and the city surrendered. Unfortunately, we do not know what happened to the anonymous woman, but we may imagine most likely a tragic ending. Next slide, please. Apollodorus, in his Library of Myths, explains another similar story regarding the sack of the Taphian island by Amphitryon. Alcmene gave her husband Amphitryon the mission to subjugate Taphos, the home of Terlaus, in order to exact revenge on her father and brothers. Then Amphitryon undertook a military expedition together with Cephalus and Heleus. They easily overran the outer islands of Terlaus' kingdom, but the island of Taphos resisted, since it was believed that Terlaus was immortal while he had his golden hair. However, Comaeto, Terlaus' daughter, falling in love with Amphitryon, cut off his father's hair, causing his death. Immediately after, the Greeks took the island and Amphitryon killed Comaeto without mercy. After that, Cephalus and Heleus became the kings of the islands, and Amphitryon went back to Thebes with the booty. Some time later, Cephalus, who acted as an oikistés, gave his name to the island of Cephalonia. Before I continue my presentation, let's draw some conclusions regarding these three stories. They all take place during mythical military expeditions that are more akin to raids and plundering than to colonization processes. However, since both colonization and looting were regarded as acceptable ways to seize territories and earn profits, the narratives are not that different. As proof, the story of Pisidice and the sack of Methymna was included in a book on the foundation of Lesbos. All of these stories involve extreme violence from the Greeks and depict local resistance to Greek attacks. This resistance is, however, overcome by the treason of an indigenous woman who falls in love with a Greek hero. Indeed, indigenous women know how to open the gate of the city or are able to identify the weak spots in the city's defense. They have the know-how that the Greeks lack. However, the Greeks do not reward them properly. Their actions are punished with violent death. This tragic ending of indigenous women in love is the main difference between these stories of legendary colonization and those of historical colonization, as we will see. Next slide, please. The story of Lamzake is related to the foundation of the colony of Lampsacus. Plutarch, following the local historian Haron of Lampsacus, explains that Mandron, the king of the Bebryces in Pityusa and father of Lampsake, granted Phobos of Phocaia a part of his kingdom in gratitude for the help he had received in the fight against his neighboring peoples. But Phobos sent out to Pityusa his twin brother Blepsus with a group of colonists. Once there, they were welcomed and received the promised land. Next slide, please. However, some time after, the Greeks started to raid the territory. These plundering expeditions disquieted the Bebryces, who at first were envious of the gains made by the Greeks, but later began to fear them. Therefore, they decided to exterminate the Greeks. But their plan was unsuccessful thanks to the treason of Lampsake, who alerted the Greeks. Next slide, please. Thus, the Greeks organized an ambush, and as a result, the Greeks gained control over the city. They offered Mandron to stay as king together with one of the Greeks, but Mandron refused the deal out of fear of being considered a traitor and left the city. Then the Greeks refounded the city by changing its name to the one of Lampsacus in Lampsake's honor. Soon after, Lampsake became ill and passed away, but people worshipped her as a founding heroine or even as a goddess. You may say that in this story, Lampsake is not behaving out of love. However, we have some indication that love may have played some role in the original version of the story. If we go back to the beginning of the episode, Plutarch claims that Phobos was the first to throw himself into the sea from the Leucadian rocks. In antiquity, there was a legend according to which jumping into the sea from the Leucadian rock was supposed to heal anybody tormented by love. Therefore, we may argue that most likely there was a similar love theme in the original version of this foundation story, unfortunately lost. Next slide, please. Regarding Massalia's foundation story, I won't go into detail because Altai will talk about it this afternoon, but I will just focus on some aspects following Justinus' account of the foundation. Although the plot of the story is very similar to that of Lampsacus, in this case, love is explicitly mentioned twice as a way for the Greeks to integrate and settle in the native land. First, when Gyptis helps to establish the colony by choosing Protis as her husband. Next slide, please. And some decades later, when an anonymous indigenous woman who has a love affair with a Greek young man tells her lover about the murderous plans of the king Commanus against the Greeks. Therefore, thanks to the help of two indigenous women, the Greeks managed to consolidate their presence in the area in two crucial moments of the colony, at the foundation day and sometime after in its consolidation. It is worth saying that Gyptis and the anonymous woman had different experiences regarding their love for a Greek. While Gyptis and Protis get married with her father's blessing, the other woman, anonymous woman, has a secret affair with the Greek man. I suggest that we can understand this change as a result of an evolution in Greco-indigenous relationships in Massalia, from a friendly welcome when the mixed marriage between Gyptis and Protis is well accepted both by Greeks and indigenous people, to a period of confrontation caused by the rapid growth of the Greek colony, when mixed relations would no longer be viewed so favorably by the indigenous people. Next slide, please. One less similar example is the founding story of Cryasus of Caria, also explained by Plutarch. In this case, a Carian young woman called Caphene falls in love with a young and handsome Nymphaeus, who is the oikistés of a group of Melians. In order to save him, she also reveals to him the murderous intentions that her fellow citizens are planning to expel the Greeks from their territory, because once more, their colony grows up too rapidly. Next slide, please. Then the Greeks prepare an ambush, and with the help of their women, because the Melians traveled with their wives, they kill the natives and reestablish the city. Caphene and Nymphaeus get married, and the young indigenous woman receives public honors in reward for her actions. As you can see, the participation of indigenous women in these less free stories includes some very interesting narrative elements. In these accounts, we find very dynamic Greco-indigenous relationships that frequently develop over time, from an initial moment of friendly understanding to a more or less open confrontation for control of land and its resources. Love is also a fundamental driving force in the actions of the indigenous women, but here we do not have tragic but happy endings with marriages and even public recognition for the women's actions. These mixed unions are therefore not rejected by the Greeks, but quite the contrary. They are accepted as a legitimate way of ensuring not only the foundation, but also the development of the new city. We are surely running out of time, but just let me add two final ideas. To me, it is clear that indigenous women, unlike Greek women, have an outstanding agency in stories of colonization. They choose their Greek lovers to the point that, if necessary, they betray their own communities for them, contributing to the establishment of the Greeks in an area. In the mythical past, this agency is usually brutally punished by the Greeks, although they take profit of it. But in historical colonization, it is not only welcomed, but also rewarded with marriage and public honors. There is, however, a troubling and uncomfortable bias in all of these stories of colonization, since the Greeks invariably succeed in founding a new colony by eliminating any kind of indigenous opposition. In this framework, indigenous women's vulnerability in the front of love was conceptualized as a very useful instrument, and Greek colonists are ready to use it without any hesitation. Next slide, please. Thank you for your attention. And if you have any question or commentary, it's very welcome.
Thank you very much, Marta. That was very interesting. I think every single example you gave would be worthwhile discussing further. But of course, we have room for some questions regarding the examples, but hopefully we'll also have some discussion on the conclusions you have drawn. So do I see any questions here at the table? Otherwise, I see Alice online. Alice, would you speak?
Hello, thank you. It's a very interesting talk. I just had a question, so thinking about sort of Elisa Dido, it's quite so interesting that her story, it's a sort of she's a foreign woman who's sort of rejecting kind of like indigenous suitors, sort of almost a kind of reversal of the kind of trope of the indigenous women sort of falling in love with the foreign hero. I just wondered whether you had any further thoughts about that.
I don't understand your question. Could you please repeat it?
Yes. No, it was a question. So the sort of trope that you're talking about, the sort of idea of sort of indigenous of woman who falls in love with sort of foreign man, and I was just thinking that the story of sort of Teos Elisa, it's the sort of reverse, in that she's a sort of foreign woman who, as in, or is sort of coming and then has sort of these indigenous suitors that sort of she's rejecting. It's sort of,
yes.
Sort of, yeah.
Exactly. What we see here is that a barbarian woman, so to say, rejects being remarried with an indigenous man, in this case a Libyan man, because he wants to stay loyal to her first husband. So Dido is a very interesting character, and we see that in Roman literature, this situation clearly changed, and we see Dido being more vulnerable to love and to, in particular, to Aeneas figure. So I think in the case of Timaeus of Tauromenion, the most interesting point is that effectively we can see a powerful woman who is even able to resist this kind of propositions. I think Dido is not in love at all with the Libyan king, but the fellow citizens compelled her to accept the proposition because I suppose for them it was interesting to have a marriage with a local authority. But Dido remains a powerful woman, according to Timaeus, until the end, rejecting this proposal. I think this proposition. I'm not sure if did I answer your question.
Yeah, no, that was more what I was thinking. Yes, it's really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva.
Thank you, Marta, for your talk. I found it very, very interesting. You keep going back to the topic of love and foreign women falling for Greek migrants, which is very useful for them when it comes to founding cities. But do you think love is actually used as a motive to undermine female political acumen or initiative?
Usually what we see is that the action, the powered women are considered to be moved to act for emotional reasons. So love is clearly emotion, and we usually find love describing the motives for a woman to act. So not only indigenous, but what is for me very striking and interesting is that in stories of colonization, love is a particularly important motive. Love, fear, and envy. I should say that these are the three main themes in narrative in stories of foundation concerning emotion. So it's true, love defines the action of women more or less everywhere and denigrate also the action of women. But here in stories of foundations, they are not denigrated for this particularly. In fact, in historical colonization, we find that they are rewarded and even they receive honors for this. No? So it's not we have not just one interpretation. So this stories, of course, change with the years, and but in general, in this case, in this particular case, when we are talking about stories of foundation, love is not particularly bad for the Greeks, of course, for the Greeks.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I would also have some comment leading into a question. So the topic of love is definitely very pronounced in these stories. But would you agree that we should ultimately subdivide the stories into two groups? There is the one group where we have the foreign woman who falls in love and then is ready to betray her people, that is doing something bad, actually. And it's a weakness that the Greeks exploit, but it doesn't end good for that woman. She can never be integrated into the new Greek people because she is genuinely weak and bad. And then there are these women where there may also be love, but it is a sanctioned love. It's interesting to wonder what came first. Is it acknowledged that a certain woman, such as Gyptis or Peta or Lampsake, plays a positive role in the tradition of a people? And if that is the case, is there a later development which sanctioned that love? And very often love of a girl, of a young woman, is sanctioned by the agreement of her father or by divine guidance. I think I see these indications as quite distinctive. And a major methodological problem that we have is that most of the stories or most of the versions we have are very young. There has been so much of telling and retelling and respinning going on for centuries that it's often very difficult to disentangle what the oldest version actually is. And then typically we are confined to the Greek or Greco-Roman versions without having a chance of ever knowing what the local versions might have been, or the local non-Greek versions. So that's another question. What would you suggest to overcome the methodological problems of being confined largely to the Greek or Greco-Roman literary tradition?
This is a very important question, Altai. I think you are totally right, because we have the main problem of sources. All our sources concerning foundations are very late, and when we receive these traditions on foundation stories, we have a lot of lack, lacunae, a lot of gaps we cannot completely fill, and also we are not very well. We don't know very well which was the complete tradition. For example, if we take the story of Lampsacus, we know this story by Plutarch, but Plutarch agrees that he is taking this story from Mandron of Lampsacus. Mandron of Lampsacus was a local historian, so it will be very interesting to read the original story of Mandron of Lampsacus, because if there was an original story written in Lampsacus, maybe we could better understand the role of these indigenous women for the locals. Was Lampsake very important for the locals in Lampsacus or not? I suppose that yes. But I'm not sure. It's just my supposition. We don't have more information about this. So I think from the methodological point of view, we have to be very prudent. We have to have prudence. I don't know if the word is understandable in English. So
prudent, cautious.
Cautious, yes, and to be honest and saying we just have these glimpses on foundation stories. We don't have the complete story of this legends or foundations legends, just some parts of it, and trying to, as you already have done, Altai, trying to establish different periods, or it's very interesting. Sometimes it's very difficult. And in fact, following Carol Dougherty work, I think what is more important is not is trying to interpret how the Greeks conceptualized all this women's participation and involvement in stories of colonization. And we can try to put the stories in different periods and try to understand how the story was developed, with the years. And I don't know if you understand my answer, Altai. It's very difficult question, very interesting question.
I do understand, and I could actually exemplify precisely that on your example, say, of Lampsake. As you said, you think there must have been a love story, but kind of it disappeared from our sources. And I think the fact that Lampsake then later disappears maybe a result of the Athenian turn, that at a later point, the Greeks of Lampsakos were not comfortable with having a non-Greek ancestress. So that would be the time-relevant factor, that the ideological change over time then changed the narrative. That would allow us to perhaps understand what happened, because it is miraculous how this important figure just vanishes from the scene.
Yeah.
And we all sense there must have been a love story, and then she just goes away. That is very awkward. So I think that's a good tool, or this would be a good example of.
Maybe I can add also one idea. It is very interesting to see that in these three last stories of foundation, at the end the Greeks win, and they exterminate the indigenous men. So they are always talking about indigenous men. In the case of Mandron in Lampsacus, for example, Mandron, the ancient king, lives with the remaining children and wives. So in fact, the city was completely refounded, and the population changed completely, if we follow the text, because the Greeks arrived and established a new era for the city, changing even the name, of course, from Pythia to Lampsacus. So it is very interesting to see where we can place the indigenous woman in this situation of completely changing the population. Was this situation comfortable for an indigenous woman or not? And which role played this woman as an ancestor? So it's very interesting and very complicated, and because we lack of text, we have what we have, no more.
It will be difficult to find something in historical text or in text that pretend or that to deal with historical situations, but we may find some answers in the epic cycles of the Trojan women and that were captives and their fates. That's the only thing that comes to my mind where we actually might hear some voices of how these women really felt. And otherwise, I have to admit that most of the male authors of historiography were just not interested in this. It's a reality that we have to face when we try to deal with our sources. So Marta, let me thank you very much again. We have reached the end of this unit, but this may be a good opportunity to encourage everyone to continue the dialogue and the discussion. So that's always one of the intentions I have when I organize a workshop, that this is meant to be a start of a conversation, and it should go on, and via email and Zoom. It's so easy nowadays to follow up with the speaker. So join me please all in thanking Marta once again for her thought-provoking speech.
Thank you to you. It was a pleasure.